Right, hello everybody. Today I've got a special guest, a friend of mine, Martin Lonergan, who was the Reform candidate for Walthamstow.
Yeah, I was asked to stand. I had never really had any political aspirations, and I haven't voted for many, many years. And I was that disillusioned with UK government. I can't remember. The last time I voted was probably over 20 years ago. But I was
Who did you
asked.
vote for?
I voted Conservative. I grew up as a young Conservative and voted for them. And then I voted for Tony Blair in his first term, something which I deeply regret. And I think it was thereafter that I became disillusioned with
But
voting.
that was a little bit similar as well because I went through exactly the same thing. After Margaret Thatcher, we had a few years of Tory government and they were just stagnating. And
Correct.
Tony Blair seems to be this sort of like fresh, new thing with new energy, new ideas.
He
Uh,
came along with such promise. He was
yeah,
presented himself very well, made all
yeah,
sorts of promises. And you're right, after a stagnating period with the Tories,
yeah.
um,
And he
yeah,
reshaped the Labour Party. He moved away from all that militant tendency that was about to take over the party.
yeah,
And we're in a sort of similar situation now because a lot of people have voted Labour, but perhaps we've learned from our experience. But a lot of people have now voted Labour, not so much because they wanted Labour, they just they were fed up with they wanted to teach the Conservatives a lesson for not delivering.
yeah, they're
And in fact,
disillusioned.
they
Yeah.
didn't get any more votes, did they? I mean, the number of votes they've got is less than what Jeremy Corbyn got. It's just most people didn't bother to vote.
Correct. Yeah, I think apathy is the biggest problem that we face of getting any real change in this country, and that's probably where reform fell down. There were too many people that were convinced it was a wasted vote. I came across my Tory opponent in Walthamstow at the count at the Waltham Forest Town Hall on the night, and she just her only comment to make to me was that reform was a wasted vote and that this country is a two-party system and that you either vote Labour or you vote Conservative. And this is a woman in a constituency where the Tories have never won in my lifetime. It's a strong Labour, a Labour stronghold, and she was simply her message to her voters was don't vote reform, it's a waste.
Mm-hmm.
That I thought was a tragedy.
And in a way, she has a point because this first past the post system, which until now I've always supported because I thought proportional representation. I understand the argument, but I thought that always leads into coalition governments, and then coalition governments are weak, and then the smaller parties sort of like have too much influence, too much leverage. Whereas first past the post system, okay, it's a bit unfair, but at least you get more sort of like solid governments and all that. But this time it's gone really out of shape, isn't it? Because you've got 4 million people who voted for reform and they've got 5 representatives. 3.5 million people have voted for Liberal Democrats and they've got 71 representatives. Any fair person would now say there's something wrong with this. This can't be right.
Yeah, I mean,
And the most minority government ever in British history has got an absolute majority, more than the Tories got last time.
yeah, things change, and I think and if you can't change with them, then you're going to have a problem, and I think that's where we find ourselves, because you're right. The Labour government got in with a lower percentage of the votes than the ones that Jeremy Corbyn collected, and he lost badly. And as much as the first past the post system, maybe it had its merits a long time ago, and you're worried about proportional representation. What you got to remember is the last general election was won by the Tories on a super majority. They should have been able to affect change. All they managed to do was destroy themselves with internal argument and scandal.
It's just a textbook thing about how to destroy an absolute majority by not delivering anything. Try all the time trying to appeal to people that would never vote for you and alienating the people that actually put you where you are.
Correct. And you end up with the super majority. You had a Conservative Party that was unable to actually agree on anything. And I think we're probably going to see the same thing again now, because we now have Labour with the super majority. And if Labour managed to squander the same supermajority and achieve nothing, can actually tear themselves apart from inside. Those two examples of our last two general elections, if the Tories manage it and then the Labour repeat it, that has to be the argument for proportional representation, because Your original argument was that first past the post means that you get a strong government, and proportional representation means that you get coalition governments. Well, strong governments obviously don't work. If the Tories couldn't make it work, and Labour now managed to repeat the same process, so and the definition of stupidity is to keep trying the same thing and expect a different result. So it's time.
Yeah, but how would you bring about that change? Because you will need a majority in the parliament to make to change the way things work, the elections work. And if you don't have the majority, what would you do?
Well, perhaps a referendum on whether we go for proportional representation. I mean, we managed to make our minds up about Brexit.
It's the government that calls the referendum, doesn't it? So if the government is Labour, then they're definitely not going to call for a referendum and give away their supermajority.
But if the Labour government in power squanders their supermajority in the way that the Tories did, surely enough Labour supporters will be as equally disillusioned as the Conservative voters were in the last period, and that collectively the will of the people demands that we have proportional representation, and that's where we go. So we have a government that actually represents the nation, as opposed to the first past the post system, which seems to represent something completely different.
Well, let's go back to Walthamstow and just tell us what happened at the general election. So, I mean, any particular reason why you stood up for Walthamstow?
No particular reason at all. I was asked if I would stand because Reform wanted to have a candidate in as many constituencies in the country as possible, so that they could get an indication of their overall support nationally, which obviously they've been able to achieve that by securing 4 million votes.
But you didn't think you had the chance of winning, did
No,
you?
I never. Look, it's a strong Labour constituency. It's predominantly it's been Labour since time immemorial. The incumbent there is a front bencher for the Labour Party, so she obviously has it because it's a safe seat. She had a very strong majority, even in the Tory super majority of the previous general election. She won that seat safely. 98% of people in Walthamstow, I had access to a lot of the data, obviously, once I became a constituent. 98% of the people in that constituency were Remainers. So it was always going to be a hard sell, anything attached to Nigel Farage, because he's the guy.
Despite all that, how did you do?
I did okay. Yeah, I was a couple of hundred votes behind the Conservative candidate, who's a local school governor.
Only a couple of hundred votes.
Only a couple of hundred votes. Yeah, she's
so you came third.
No, the Green Party did quite well. The Green Party was second. Tories were third. I was fourth. Right. I did beat the Liberal Democrats, who had quite a lot of. They're an established party, and there were quite a lot of Liberal Democrat people at the count. You know, they had a serious run at the seat. And I think they were a bit disappointed to lose me. As I say, I had no support. I was Reform's a very young party, as it wasn't a seat likely to be won by me, I didn't get a lot of support from the party because they had other more important targets to support. Like
what were you hearing from the people when we were going on the doorsteps? What were the people that were voting for you were saying, and what were the people who weren't voting for you were saying?
The people that weren't voting for me had pretty much a standard answer or a standard badge to label me with, and that was that Reform was a racist party. I mean, some people barely knew who Reform were, and those that did looked at me as if I represented some sort of far right fascist, neo-Nazi organisation, which obviously.
So at this point, just tell us a little bit about yourself, because you've actually been to many countries and lived in different places. And
I've had
I know the wide range of friends that you have, which are you've probably got more diversity amongst your friends than what we see amongst Just Stop the Oil protesters,
absolutely.
Socialist Workers' Party protesters.
I've had a very peripatetic life. I've spent the last 25 years.
That's a very good word, actually, doesn't it? That means that you're someone who goes around travelling and working in different places.
Yes, it's someone who's never settles in any place for too long. Yeah. So, and the last 12 years, probably in the Middle East. I've spent a lot of time in the US, California, and on the East Coast as well. Washington, DC, I was there for 6 months. But no, the last 25 years have been pretty much on the hoof. I did 3 years in China, couple of years in Switzerland. So yeah, extremely diverse.
And our common friend that connected us together is actually Jewish. So
Yeah, I've also
so
been to Israel.
yeah.
Yeah,
So nowhere near far right fascist that
no,
you're labelled by the.
no. I mean, I was introduced to potty by a Jewish friend of mine who I've been friends with for probably close on 40 years. Potty obviously is Iranian, and I spent a lot of time living in the Middle East, in Muslim countries. I have lots of Muslim friends, and I've to say I'm racist would be completely ridiculous.
I mean, were you able to convince them otherwise, or was it just too much of a struggle?
Look, I mean,
window that you had.
Yeah, I had a very short window, but I walked across America in 2021 to save the life of a brown man sentenced to death in the Middle East. He's a Lebanese guy. He's a friend, and I did I walked almost 3,000 miles handing the sanctions.
Did you tell them that when they were?
Yeah, I told them that, and Fox News followed me. It's out there in the media, but yeah, I told them that, and if I had some people would just completely close to it, but anyone who knows me would be able to say that I'm not racist. And
the people who were voting for you, why were they voting for you? Were they mainly disgruntled Tory people, Tory voters, or was it
generally it's disgruntled Tory voters? Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to tap into the Labour support market at the moment, and I get that completely. We've had years of Tory governments who've been unsuccessful in making people in Walthamstow's lives any better, and probably a lot of the country as well. So therefore, if you are historically a Labour supporter and your team haven't been in play for quite some time, you're naturally going to assume that given the chance, they will make your lives better. Mm-hmm. I'd like to think in 4 years' time when I go back.
How many people didn't vote at all? Do you know? Have you got the figures?
Unfortunately, huge. I think about 40% of the electorate in Walthamstow didn't bother to vote. And I would imagine a large percentage of those would have been potential reform voters. They just didn't think it worthwhile going to.
So the idea is to convince that silent majority.
It's the silent majority
to come out and take part.
Someone like myself, someone who'd given up voting. I gave up voting a long time ago. So it's getting the British people back out on the street and standing up for democracy and actually casting a vote. The reason I stood for reform when I asked initially, I said no, because I had zero interest in politics. But the argument put to me by a human rights barrister, the guy that asked me, was you can't complain about it when given the option that you didn't do anything about it. Yeah. So his argument was well put, and that's why I decided to stand.
Here now, I want to go to tactical voting, the idea of tactical voting. I think we would have had a better result if Reform hadn't tried to put a candidate everywhere they could, but engaged in some tactical voting. So, I mean, we can start with the London mayor elections, for example. So it was essential that Sadiq Khan had to be voted out. I mean, that was just like, we should have put up with anything.
Yeah.
And yet, so the Tories didn't put up a very credible candidate for whatever reason. But Reform shouldn't have put up a candidate against her. So it shouldn't have divided the votes, the anti-Sadiq Khan votes. They should have all gone to her. And in a lot of other constituencies, we should have sort of had a look to see, right, okay, here Reform hasn't got a chance to win. So rather than putting up a candidate, let this vote go against Labour, so at least Labour don't get an absolute majority. Because you know what my fear is? I mean, even if I was voting for Conservative, even if I was voting for Reform, I never like it when one party gets a huge majority, like the one that Labour has got. Because if you don't have a strong opposition, that's dictatorship knocking on the door. You always get much better results if the ruling party has a slight majority, so it knows that it has to be heard, it knows that it has to deliver, and it's got to be on its tiptoes, it can't get complacent. Whereas huge majorities just make the governments corrupt, despotic, complacent. So has Reform got any plans for more tactical voting next time? Because they were just, they had a very short window of time. They were just putting up any candidate, and some of them they weren't really being vetted properly.
Correct.
So
yeah, but look, with any government putting forward candidates, even with the best vetting in the world, it's been shown historically that MPs sometimes aren't that they aren't quite the characters that we would like them to be. All parties have suffered from that. I think one of the things that I would say, looking from my point of view, is the responsibility of the mainstream news channels and media to be unbiased and fair in how they do. Because look, I was an avid Radio 4 listener for many years, and I've had to come away from it. The twist and the spin on news at the moment, and I don't know. It's frightening how misrepresented things are in the news, and
big time.
And social media is equally to blame. There's so much information coming at us, and there's such a spin on it that unfortunately the public are being manipulated. But this supermajority thing, initially I can understand why you can be fearful of it, but as I say, the Tories had one and squandered it. I think the Labour will do the same.
They squandered it because they just thought they can just get away with
Correct.
it. They can stretch it for 5 years, but if they only had a reduced slight majority, I think they would have been more vigilant and they would have tried to deliver more.
The problem with the 4-year cycle of politics is that every government seems to be really just concerned about how they're going to hang on to the power at the end of their cycle.
Yeah.
The desire to remain in power, it appears to me, now outweighs the desire to deliver a secure financial strategy for us as a country.
So that's a good point there. So, okay, we know what's happened. We are where we are. Whatever reason,
we're in a terrible mess. First of all, our borders are insecure, and we've had such an influx of foreigners into the country that we don't have the resources to deal with them. The people that live here's lives are now made worse and harder because of the strain on the services that we have. We're generating ill feeling between what were once harmonious groups in the UK.
Society is becoming very polarised.
It's becoming very polarised. And anybody that's trying to just
talk common sense
is
just labelled with different things.
Is labelled this or that. I mean, whether they're labelled left or right, they're labelled something. Anyone that tries to apply common sense. I mean,
we can't have a civilised debate anymore. We just shout and label each other, and
the behaviour of both sides. Is
we want to cancel people, we want to ban people, we want to just control the narrative and just push one narrative, and it just goes all against my way of thinking. Because I mean, I always like to hear both sides of things, well, sometimes more than two sides of something before making up my mind. I like having a debate. This is what I liked in England. You didn't have to look over your shoulder after what you said. If you made errors of judgments, you could learn from your mistakes. There wasn't consequences that made you frightened about saying something, about expressing an opinion. But that all seems to be eroding now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there was a case in point. I heard something on the GB News this morning. The discussion had people from both sides of the some centrist, some right, and some left. Although they would all claim to be centrist, but there were definitely people from both sides of the spectrum. And the debate, or the topic that was first raised, was a Norfolk village, the parish council discussing whether or not to take down the Union Jack from flying over the town hall. Now that was the topic for debate. However, the discussion, which I think lasted for 10 to 12 minutes, never actually got on to the topic to be debated. They are actually arguing about each other's personalities. I mean, I never actually heard them discuss the topic in hand. They were too busy arguing about their points of view and where they were coming from.
The last video that I made on my YouTube channel, it didn't get a lot of views. I don't know why, but I was actually, what was I Googling? I was Googling some good quotes about freedom of speech, right? and I came across this article that was written 4 years ago about the freedom of speech to be able to offend people is a priceless commodity,
Correct.
right? And it was actually published in the Guardian,
Mm.
which is not a far right newspaper.
No, for sure. I read the Guardian myself.
Yeah,
I actually read it because I find that the Telegraph a little bit too. So I like to read something that
I like to read both sides.
challenges my thought process,
yeah,
rather than something I'm always agreeing with.
yeah. And the author was a guy called Kenan Malik, and I looked him up, and apparently he was associated with quite left-wing organisations, and he was active in the anti-Nazi League. So again, the author wasn't like a far-right person either. And the article was written after the Charlie Hebdo murder, and it was arguing very articulately that look, if you keep sort of like saying that you mustn't offend people, I mean, freedom of speech, you will offend people, and you know, if you keep sort of like giving people the luxury of like not being offended, then they will actually use that to
negate any point you want to put across. Yeah.
absolutely
Any valid point you wish to argue.
Yeah, they will sort of like welcome it and sort of like use that to shut down any debate.
And that's exactly what I heard today.
And that would actually promote the extremists in every community.
Yeah,
because it's now giving them a weapon with which they can sort of like go on the offensive.
What happens is the two sides never actually get into debating the topic in hand to decide whether the flag should stay or not.
Yeah.
They're too busy expressing their own.
Yeah.
You know, I'm offended. You said this. Well, I'm offended. You said that. We've actually forgotten about what we're arguing about. We're now arguing about our. Yeah.
I remember watching Life of Brian.
Yeah,
in the cinema,
great humour.
And I actually watched it with our common friend, with Liz, right? It was Jewish.
Yeah.
And we were rolling on the floor, right? And I actually understood the Bible. I mean, we were studying religious. We had religious education at school. We were like reading the Bible and all that. But it was a boring class. It wasn't something that you look forward to. But I actually learned the Bible better from watching the movie, right? You can't make a movie like that now, can you? No. Especially about certain communities or religions, and it's just such a shame.
When you can't laugh at yourself anymore, then
it was also a British trait that British are the only ones who can laugh at themselves.
Yeah, fall over and find it. I mean, obviously you don't want to. You see somebody break that. I mean, if a friend of mine falls over, first thing I want to do is check they're all right.
Yeah.
When I realise they're all right, I will find humour in there. And it's not necessary. And I'm not looking to blame. Culture. And I'm not looking to blame the person who left the item they fell over.
Yeah,
it's I mean, sometimes you have to own your mistakes, don't you?
It's such a shame. Why don't people realise what they're losing?
Yeah,
having
lived in some places in the Far East and the Middle East, some of the freedoms that we enjoy, I think people take them for granted. Because
I think me and you realise that because we've seen the other side.
I've seen some racism. I mean, I've experienced racism because I've been in other places where I have been a minority, and I've seen other people suffer racial abuse in these places.
The way they treat the migrant workers in countries like Qatar and
they have no value. I mean, if somebody falls off of the scaffold, there's not going to be a health and safety inquiry. It would probably be months before the people back home realise that they've lost a loved one who's fallen off the scaffold. They'll probably be lucky, and they won't get a body back.
And their living conditions. I mean, we've seen it all.
I've been there, seen it. Been in China, watched the way they quash protests in Hong Kong. It's frightening, and the liberties that we do. And that's one of the things when I stood in Walthamstow, which I found ironic. I'm glad the Green got a decent vote, but I suspect the people that voted for Green are perhaps the ones who just can't bring themselves to vote for Labour. But one of the things I found strange was that the incumbent there, Stella Creasy, she's got a policy that she's trying to push through, and it's about abortion, and it's quite controversial. She wants to move it to full term and infanticide, where a child gets killed by the mother in the first couple of weeks. there'd be no action taken against the mother. It almost allow a mother to end the life of her child in those early days. The abortion laws are a difficult one, and myself, I would just leave them where they are. They seem to work quite well for British society for many years, so I would just leave them alone. But she's got this policy. Now, Walthamstow, a huge percentage of the population in Walthamstow are Muslim. And I've lived in Muslim countries, and I know that abortion is haram. It's absolutely forbidden in the Quran.
Yeah.
And
it's like with gay rights and all that. I mean, they're not going to go for it.
All the but so who are these? Who are these people in Walthamstow that are giving her this super majority that she gets? She won by a huge majority in Walthamstow. Yes, only 60% of the people voted, and she got about 45% of that vote. So I assume that amongst those, there's a large percentage of Muslim people. I perhaps they're unaware of her policies. I don't know, but it's a strange old constituency that, and also there's a lot of shopkeepers in Walthamstow. I think that they're going to find that their lives become a lot harder with the new taxation that Labour's going to lump onto their shoulders in the coming years, because the Labour's policies do not suit small businesses, and Walthamstow is full of small businesses. So, yeah, I'd like to think that, I'm not sure if I'll be standing for reform there in 4 years' time. I'd like to be standing somewhere, but it'd be interesting to see.
So, what is your plan? Are you going to continue with reform? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to continue with reform. I'm probably, I've actually already put myself forward that I'd stand for local elections next year. So I'll stand for local council elections. Again, it's up to the party where they want me to stand. But I'd like to stand in local council elections with a view that I'm 61 now, so 65, 66, still got a lot of life left in me, and I think I would probably do quite well for reform if I were to be elected. So yeah, I mean, I had an interesting life, travelled the world, seen lots of things.
I get the sense that they're really coming after the Reform Party. I mean, the attacks against Nigel Farage are horrendous. They're even accusing him of sort of like being manipulated by the Russians now.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, where's all that going to get? I mean, are we really going to have like a one-party system? I mean, where's all this leading to? It's frightening.
It is frightening. I don't know. I just hope that the British people wake up. Like you say, it's that 40% who haven't voted.
That silent majority again.
That silent majority. Britain as a nation is a pretty amazing place, and we've achieved a lot of things over the years. And to see where we're going, and see the right of free speech, and there certainly is definitely two-tier policing, and there's two-tier media as well, because anybody that's protesting about the immigration or speaking out against all of the illegal immigration or the many of the problems that the British people are facing, NHS waiting lists, any of those, they are far right protesters. And anyone that speaks for allowing the illegal immigration to continue, I mean, it is illegal being the operative word, they are considered counter demonstrators. I mean, the word counter demonstrators sounds like you're a good person.
Yeah. Did you notice in none of these counter demonstration and protests there was never an England flag? There was all these like Palestinian flags. There's actually the same mob that gained all these like pro-Hamas marches week and week after. And we've seen some violent ones amongst them, and some of them have even been arrested. But yet the establishment are just like full of praise for them, from the police to King's Charles to Church of England. They're all like praising them, without really looking into them to see, like, I mean,
and it appears that the diversity.
It was Socialist Workers' Party banners all the way.
All of them have tagged into this counter protester mob, and supporting Hamas, etc. But have any of them any idea what Hamas would do to them if it had them under its control? I mean, I would not.
If only they found out what Hamas have done to their own. The new leader of the Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, is now the leader, replacing Ismail Haniyeh. I mean, he killed some of Hamas's top commanders for just suspecting them of being gay. Not even proving, just suspecting them.
So, I mean, it's strange how we've got these people whose lives would be ended very swiftly coming out in support of the people that would end their lives if they.
It's
Yeah,
mind-boggling, isn't it?
yeah, it is
And
mind-boggling.
what we've been talking about is this like labeling people that just want to debate something, just want to ask legitimate questions. It's just so similar to what's happening in Iran. Say, for example, I mean, forget nuclear weapons, just nuclear power, right? You can't argue in Iran saying, is nuclear energy, nuclear power, is it economically viable for us? Is it something we need? We've got all these other resources of energy. Do we really need nuclear power when we can have, wind energy, solar energy, renewable energy? We've got the largest gas fields
In the world,
in the world. We've got all the
yeah.
oil and everything like so. And yet, this is costing the country so much. I mean, the only nuclear power station that we've managed to set up in Iran after I think 15 years or something is only producing 2% of the electricity. Is it worth it economically? And we were making a program about nuclear power in Iran. We were talking to some Russian scientists, and they were saying that after Chernobyl, they were all out of work. They were lucky if they were driving taxis and all that. So when Russia got the contract to build the nuclear power station in Iran, that was like a godsend to
Yeah.
them. And they were saying they were deliberately having the wrong parts ordered, wrong parts delivered
to
extend the contract. So something that should have taken 5 years to build took well over 20 years. I can't remember the exact cost of how much it cost, but hugely, hugely overcosted. And if you just try to debate that, if you just try to argue that in Iran, you will be labelled as a foreign agent, as a traitor, right?
Yeah.
Which is similar to here. If you want to just debate the uncontrolled, unvetted, unlimited immigration, straight away you're labelled as a far right, extreme right, racist in that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't understand what reasonable person would go for uncontrolled, unvetted, unlimited immigration.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to shut someone down with a valid argument
To
you
label
can't
them.
argue
Yeah.
is to label them, and
Yeah.
I think that's what they do.
Yeah.
I think that
This is why I come across Martin, because when I go to some of these protests, I try to talk to the people on the other side because I want to hear their views,
yeah, of course.
and sometimes I want them to hear my views as well. But they don't want to talk. They don't want to shut. They tell me to go away. I try to warn, say, for example, the leftists here about the experience of the left in Iran, how they went to bed with the Islamists, and then when the Islamists took over power, they were the first ones to be annihilated. And I just want to, um, pass that experience to them or just talk to them about it. They don't want to know. They don't want to talk. They don't want to debate.
Yeah, I find it frightening, and I've always thought most arguments have at least two sides to them, and
Yeah,
and
just hear
sometimes
it.
when someone disagrees with me, I'd like to understand why, and that's one of the things about the Walthamstow role. I want to understand why people don't agree with me, because if I could understand why, it might swing my point of view round. But if they won't allow me, or they won't even take the time to explain or debate with me, then and all they want to do is shut me down, then I have to think they have a weak argument. Because someone with a decent argument, someone who's eloquent and can speak well, would surely just debate the subject with you,
Exactly.
and with a view to winning you round. I mean, if I knocked on somebody's door as a reform candidate, and the person inside at the door didn't agree with the reform but had such a wonderful argument, it might actually change what I did.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
that's what I'd like to do: meet the argument, and have, not even meet the debate and have the debate. So yeah, I'm the same as you, and then if they would, once I'd listened to them, if they would listen to me, just out of respect, because I have travelled far and wide, and I have experienced all sorts of things. I mean, I've come unstuck in a Muslim country. I disputed something with a local person, and it didn't end well for me. I've seen what draconian power is.
I think that could be the topic of our next talk.
Yeah,
and also, I think it's been a good introduction to introduce you. But there's so many other things that we can talk about in the future. One of them is this book, A Deal with the Devil. That's you've written yourself.
Yeah,
it's a fiction.
It's a complete fiction. But it's a political fiction. All of the characters in the book most of the characters in the book are real, and the timelines are accurate. I've written it as a fiction, but unknowingly I may have actually written some truths in there. There might be a lot more to the book than anyone knows.
And as soon as I finish, I've read some of the books, but as soon as I finish reading all of it, then we can talk about that.
Yeah,
Because,
I spent quite a lot of time down there in the Middle East. So I studied Iran and its politics, and I've always been fascinated by the country. Historically, I mean, it's the birth of a lot of some of the best, well, the origin of some of the best things in the world, including the game of chess, I believe.
I think backgammon was invented in Iran and chess was invented in India, but it came through Iran, and then it got promoted through.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful country: mountains, valleys, rivers, very fertile.
All kinds of climates. Yeah.
Fantastic cuisine.
Yeah,
and plenty of princesses.
and if we had a proper government, then we would be on par with South Korea now. Well, because that's where we were before the revolution.
My book takes
and look where South Korea is now.
My book takes you through quite a wonderful journey. It's 180,000 words, and it takes Iran through some interesting times, and it gives a what if, a possible if things did change for Iran. And in the epitaph, there's an interesting bit where a man with a skull cap sitting in a cafe, and a gentleman with a turban walks up and sits down to join him for a coffee. Nobody pays any attention because it's Paris, a diverse place where you'd find wouldn't turn ahead to see those two types sitting together. Over in the Middle East, it's most unlikely, unfortunately.
Well, having said that, the first time I went to Israel, the first night, I was invited to go to a restaurant in Jaffa. And I went to the restaurant. The restaurant was owned by an Arab. Half the customers were Arab, half were Israelis. Some of the Arabs and Israelis were sitting together. And I'm thinking, what is this? I thought, like, they're killing each other over here and all that. And I was just so surprised that they're all living together and eating together and having fun together harmoniously. It was.
And what everybody forgets is that Iran and Israel are not natural enemies. They share no borders, and there's no reason.
No territorial disputes.
There's no reason. The conflict in Palestine has always been between the Israelis and the Arab world. I mean, historically, Iran has been very significant in Middle East, in the shaping of the Middle East. One of the things I found significant in my research was the minuscule size of Iran's GDP when you look at what it has to offer as a country and the diverse population and its resources. If it were to be allowed back into a free market, I think what you're trying to promote, entrepreneurism and people working for themselves in Iran as opposed to working for the state, it would be an amazing country. The level of growth that the Middle East could see.
Yeah, and I think the whole world could benefit from it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, historically, Persia was always a great source of resources for everybody. So
well, it's been great talking to you, and look forward to the next chat.
I do, yeah.